This is a Mini E or Mini Electric, and it is a pretty standard Mini. Like, you get in this and honestly, you don't really notice until you set off, and then you definitely do. The silence from, well, the lack of an internal combustion engine is pretty prevalent when you pull off the line, and it's absolutely silent, all bar a touch of road noise and your air conditioning blowing. It's definitely a weird feeling compared to, well, driving a what I would call a standard Mini. One nice thing is that despite what is undoubtedly the added weight of batteries and motors, it still feels incredibly light and nimble and very easy to toss around these rather tight and windy streets. The steering is incredibly light, which is actually probably a very good thing. You have a lot of assistance, which makes it very easy for maneuverability. But the other thing is that it feels very planted. It feels like the sort of car that I actually wouldn't mind taking on a longer motorway journey, because it feels stable. It doesn't feel like I'm gonna have to spend a lot of energy trying to just keep it in the lane, keep it at speed. It feels pretty comfortable and a much more all-rounder and more quality feel than something like the Corsa E, which is obviously a very similar size, but the build quality just isn't quite as nice, and neither is the on-road handling. But it does have the stereotypical electric push you back into your seat quite firmly. It's pretty fun there. One other thing to note is that the regen braking is remarkably heavy. I'm not touching the brake pedal and we are pretty much almost at a complete stop. The one thing that it doesn't do is come to an actual stop. It will still roll at 1 mile an hour, although when you take your foot off, it does creep ever so slightly, but nowhere near as fast as you would find in a standard internal combustion engine car or in a lot of the other cars that are designed to creep forward. This is in its green mode rather than the sport, so the regen braking is obviously pretty much as hard as it will go, but it is a pretty firm regen. One thing I would mention is that in here, everything is pretty much identical to the standard Mini, except for a couple of little tweaks. The digital dash shows you your e-power versus your charging, and obviously your battery capacity rather than your fuel level, but everything else is functionally identical. You still have the same automatic gear shifter, it's still the same sort of setup. You do have a slightly more EV-centered surround around the dash, but other than that, it's, again, a very similar car to the standard internal combustion engine version, just with an electric motor and some batteries. Definitely has a quick pickup off the line, which is always nice. We're now in sport mode, so it's a little bit more responsive and I assume a little bit more powerful. I think the steering has been adjusted to be heavier. I can certainly feel in these tighter roads that it does take a bit more effort to get around, which for a sportier setting is probably quite a good thing. In sport mode, the throttle response is a lot faster. It's a lot sharper, I should say, to pick up. Although, remarkably, even in sport mode, the regen braking is pretty much as hard as I would brake in a standard vehicle, using the brake pedal. So that's interesting to see. Oh. Even when you roll onto it, it genuinely does pin you back. It has a remarkable amount of torque even at high speed. And when you come off it, you do really feel like you're pretty much braking. So even in sport mode, I do think you'll need to be careful with your throttle positioning so that you don't offset or upset the balance of the car through a corner by lifting and therefore braking quite heavily. But it's definitely impressive. The steering feels a little bit numb still. It's still not the most sporty, although the heavier weighting does make it a more enjoyable experience rather than the really light and floaty style that you get as standard and with a lot of other vehicles of this class. I think the fact that you can still have fun with this, despite it being, an electric car and being the eco-friendly version of, well, the standard Mini, is it's quite nice. It's quite a nice difference. Oh. And yeah, it's impressive how much power it has when you put your foot down. That's for sure. And you know what? The grip is actually pretty confidence inspiring. It's not, well, it doesn't understeer, it doesn't absolutely drag you through the corner, but it held well there, even on pretty heavy acceleration, so I'm definitely impressed. Under braking, when actually using the pedal, again, it's okay. You do still use the majority of regen braking while you're on the brake pedal, so it's not, you don't feel the friction brakes quite as often as you would in a standard internal combustion engine car, but it's still pretty decent. And I have to say that Millbrook's hill route is both intense and pretty fantastic. It has insanely high hills and it's just incredibly tight while still allowing you some straights to absolutely barrel down. Oh, this is good fun. This is a fun car to drive, even if it's not the absolute fastest or sportiest. You can have fun in this. Oh, the suspension also doesn't roll too much, which is quite nice. I was expecting, obviously, generally with EVs you have higher body weight, and so the suspension either has to be stiffer to compensate for that extra weight, or it's just a bit looser, and then you get a lot of body roll, but I'm not feeling much of any here, which is kind of incredible. There is actually a variety of different drive modes that you can use. We were just in Sport, which is remarkably fun, but there are also Mid, which is pretty much your standard driving experience. You then have Green, which is obviously your slightly more efficient, much more muted throttle map until you really step on it. And then there's Green Plus, which is the maximum range available, but specifically without any comfort functions, which I assume means no air conditioning, which I don't think I would spend most of my time in if I owned this car. Since I didn't get the chance to say this on the day, I thought I would add in that the Mini Electric starts from around £26,000 and can't really be optioned up much higher. You have 184 horsepower PS available and 140 to 145 miles of WLTP range. The range might be the killer for you here, but as a city car, and as it goes, that's definitely not too bad. And on the price front, that's pretty much the same price you would pay for the standard internal combustion engine version of the 3-door Mini Cooper with a similar amount of horsepower. Anyway, that does it for this video from my first drive of the SMMT test day and of the Mini Electric. If you liked the video, feel free to let me know in the comments down below. Make sure you subscribe, as I have a whole load more of these videos to come out on a number of cars, including the Porsche Taycan and Cayman, and the Honda E, the Corsa E, and the Fiat 500e as well. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching. Check out more videos on the end cards, and we'll see you on the next video.